This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play. We're also now on Megaphone. We are, as always, on YouTube. And all of our content is on cincyjungle.com. So get us how you like the best, I guess.
So you had an interesting viewer question, I believe, right? That you want to bring up?
I did. Are you ready for this one, John? Because this one because
I don't like that. I don't like that foreshadowing. It's pretty bad now.
The reason I ask is because if it's the one that I think we're going to talk about, it's because you were the one who received a lot of hell about the Ryan Tannehill thing and the topic of Ryan Tannehill, which, by the way, I think you wrote about this as well on cincyjungle.com. This has not gone away because Mr. Twitter polarizing guy, Benjamin Albright, talked more about the fact that because there's news that came out that Alex Smith may not be able to play in 2019. That was already kind of conjectured anyways, but that it's as more time is passing, it's looking less likely that he is going to play in 2019. Then you connect the dots of Jay Gruden, who is now interviewing Ken Zampese as his quarterback's coach in Washington. You know, might there be a trade for Andy Dalton to Washington? And then
they interviewed Bill Lazor today too.
Okay, there you go. All right. So for the same position?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, you see the connections there. This one comes from Jason Dickerson, who actually I didn't realize he lives in Germany. He's been in contact with me a lot, mostly via email, and I didn't realize he was living in Germany. So that's pretty cool. Another little side note we'll talk more about in a second. Anyway, so he brought up the idea of Derek Carr to the Bengals. And you sit here and you go, well, how does that make any sense? Well, you have to connect some dots here, okay? The first is, we talked about Daniel Jones earlier in the show about his performance at the Senior Bowl. John Gruden, big quarterback guy, supposedly really likes Daniel Jones as a prospect and as a potential NFL quarterback. If you remember, before the season, there was kind of some rumblings. I'll have to pull up exactly what they were, but basically, John Gruden, I think as the Monday night commentator or something to that effect, was critical of Derek Carr, and there was some thought of, well, is Derek Carr even really a fit with John Gruden? Might there be some issues? And Carr had a decent statistical season this year, but obviously was not that team was stripped of talent before the season even began in terms of trades and whatnot. Then you look at Brian Callahan, quarterback's coach, which my colleague John Sheeran here broke the news that from the Senior Bowl that Callahan will be the Bengals offensive coordinator once Zach Taylor arrives. Raiders quarterback coach becoming the offensive coordinator. People potentially wavering on Dalton in terms of a new staff, new head coach. So there's a lot of dots to connect here. Does it make sense to you, John?
I'm going to piss some people off, but it doesn't make as much sense as Tannehill because I actually just looked at Derek Carr's contract now, and that's the biggie. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So it makes more sense for the Raiders to cut Carr than for the Dolphins to cut Tannehill because I think the Raiders would only incur like half of the dead money that the Dolphins would have to actually release him. I think the Dolphins are trying to work out for a trade for Tannehill, and if they can't do that, they'll probably just cut him because I think they owe him like $26 million. But
yeah,
for the Raiders, I think they only incur $7.5 million in dead money if they release him now, and they're drafting 4th overall, so they'll definitely be able to pick Daniel Jones. But I think if both Tannehill and Carr become available on the open market, which I think one of them at least will, I honestly think that Taylor's going to kind of win out that vote and bring in his guy that he worked with at Miami over the guy that Callahan worked with for a year in Oakland. But for the purpose of what I believe either of them would come in and be, would just be that bridge quarterback for 1 or 2 years while they work on getting the guy for the future. I don't think it would make that much of a difference, but I don't think it's as likely as it would be with Tannehill. I'm honestly, because I'm just not entirely sure what Carr's future is in Oakland, because he does have, like, they do, like, this is the first year that they can finally move on from him. And if they are smitten with a quarterback, then there's no reason to keep keep on to that contract, because they liquidated all the other big contracts that they had over the past 6 months or whatever. But I think there's a little bit more writing on the wall with Tannehill, and I think Taylor being the head coach and maybe even the play caller for the Bengals is kind of went out in his preference for Tannehill over Callahan's potential influence in bringing in Carr, I guess.
Do you think, because this was one of the questions that was brought up when you talked about the Tannehill thing, do you think that Carr, who, again, I think we're 2 years removed from a season where he was a borderline MVP guy. I mean, he had an outstanding season. I think it was in 2015 or 2016.
2016.
Yeah, 2016. That earned him this contract. This year, threw for over 4,000 yards, 19 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Not great there. But 2016, 28 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, almost 4,000 yards that year. Do you see those numbers greatly increasing because, their two best players aside from Carr were released off the roster. Khalil Mack doesn't play offense, but Amari Cooper, you saw the impact he had in Dallas. Do you think that a guy like Carr would, if he's playing with AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Joe Mixon, do you think that all of a sudden that is a career resurgence and you're closer to the 30 touchdown, single digit interception guy in Cincinnati with that talent? Or do you think that year was just a fluke of a year and we're seeing a little bit more who the real Derek Carr is these past couple of seasons?
2016 was Derek Carr's, 2016 for Derek Carr was Andy Dalton's 2015. It was when everything around him clicked perfectly. He was in the perfect system. He had probably the best offensive line of any team besides the Dallas Cowboys in terms of pass protection. Amari Cooper popped off that year. Just everything was clicking for the Raiders. It was like their first good season in a while. And it literally ended like Andy Dalton's season, where he got injured and couldn't play in the playoff game and couldn't do anything for that. And ever since then, just like for Dalton, it's been more on the downhill slope. I just think that Carr, Tannehill, and Dalton are all kind of in that same tier of quarterbacks where everything needs to go perfectly and they need that perfect team for them to do anything. But even if they get into the position of getting into the playoffs and winning, we haven't seen them actually proven that they can do that, I guess. And until we do see anything from those three, they should all probably be belonged in that same category, and we can't really expect them to elevate a team and carry a team if everything around them goes to crap. Because once the Raiders receiving core diminished, and once their offensive line got banged up or they had to start Colton Miller, we saw him struggle. And I think he was like the most check downy quarterback in the NFL, where his average depth of target was like 6 or 7 yards or something stupid like that. And I think he's got a better arm than what those numbers were. But if a quarterback has the tendency to just kind of check it down and not look downfield, that's not going to do your offense any good. If you have guys like AJ Green and John Ross that can stretch the field like that. So I think Carr has established himself as the quarterback that the Bengals should be looking to move on from. But again, if you're looking for just a bridge guy to kind of keep your offense afloat, then there's something really wrong with him, especially if you get him for cheaper than what he is. But I don't think that we're going to see him be any better than what he was in 2016 unless he consistently has a perfect offense around him, which is what Bengals fans continue to want for Andy Dalton.
Right. And again, it comes down to cost and, is Derek Carr substantially better than Andy Dalton? Is he a guy that's substantially better? It will be more expensive, more substantially better than guys that are in this year's class. Is he, like you mentioned, John, no more than a bridge quarterback? And if he is he better than Andy Dalton and gives him a better chance to win more games than Dalton in that capacity? These are all questions that are a little bit of unknowns at this point. I think one is inclined to think that the ceiling might be a little higher for Carr, based on that one season a couple of years ago and the fact that that team has kind of been fleeced of talent that he's been on, and the Bengals do have kind of a trio of talented guys at skill positions on offense and all of that. So, but we'll see. It sounds like a far-fetched thing. We're talking about all these kind of crazy quarterback scenarios, but it sounds like tinfoil hat stuff, but really, I mean, there are connections to be made here. You know, the Gruden to Daniel Jones, he just worked with him in Mobile. Brian Callahan to Derek Carr, he just worked with him in Oakland for a year. You know, who knows how this coaching staff views Andy Dalton. I mean, there's a lot of things in play here, so I don't think it is a little bit of a far-fetched question, but I don't think it's a wacky one or a crazy one to really ask, to be quite honest with you. It's just one that is a new one. There are connections there, and there are dots to be connected there. But interesting question. Thanks for that, Jason. We also got another email we had Jason from Germany, and we had Glenn from Denmark. Glenn Ellisborg Jorgensen. I don't know exactly how they say it.
Jorgensen.
I think it's the Y. Jorgensen. Yeah. He said, first of all, I just want to tell you, you're doing a great job with the podcast. I've been a regular listener for more than a year, but unfortunately I can't join in live as it's the middle of the night here. Well, thanks, Glenn. We'll give you a pass on that. We understand. Basically, he says, and this one I'm going to leave to you, John, because I have some notes on this player, but you said you were excited to kind of talk about this. As a Dane, I'm very excited about the draft prospect, and is it Jalte Froholt?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah,
guard from Arkansas. Do you think there are any chances he's going to end up with the Bengals? I will say this from my notes, and I'll let you talk pretty extensively about him, John. He's kind of he was a 4-star guy in college, going into college. It sounds like he's very athletic, and he's got some nice skill sets. Sounds like he's strong, but it doesn't always translate to the field type of thing, if that makes sense. And it sounds like he's made some big improvements in terms of from like when he started playing football for Arkansas in about 2016 to now. It still seems as if he might be a round 5 or later type of guy based on some stuff that I've been reading, but I'd like to hear your take on him, John.
Yeah, so even me, the guy who does a lot of offensive line stuff, I have a guy that kind of tells me about offensive line prospects. His name's Ryan. You can follow him on Twitter at Royal Redlegs. He probably won't like me plugging his name because he's a movie guy that doesn't always talk about linemen, but he's a guy that Ryan introduced me to Jalte, I think is his first name, and he played with Frank Ragnow, the center from Arkansas, who was linked to the Bengals a lot, and he played next to him last year. And then he also, Froholt actually did play a pinch of center this year. And he said, just pop his tape on. You'll see like 3 or 4 pancakes in the first 2 minutes. It doesn't matter what game you're watching. Like, all right, dude. And legit, I watched the first 2.5 minutes against like Colorado State when he was at center, and he pancaked like 4 guys in the first quarter. And it's like the torque, the lower body drive, the pop that he has, and either reach blocks or down blocks, it's extremely evident. And some guys you can tell, like some guys may bench 40 times at the combine. Some guys, can squat a lot, but this guy has actual play strength, and so play strength that does translate to the field. And I think he's athletic enough to make those angle blocks, but when he's got his hands on you, like it's over. And he told me what his name. Oh yeah, here we go. His
sword or something, right?
Yeah, it literally means hero, like hero sword or something like that. So like obviously a 1st-round name. If you want my name, I'll let you draft him in the 1st round, but he's got extremely good tape, and I think you're right. It did get better over time, as long like the more he kind of learned and got integrated with the system. He played against SEC competition. Obviously, Ragnow was a good player coming out of Arkansas, and he kind of has those similar traits. And he played a lot of guard, like I said, a little bit of center, but I think he's a good prospect. And like you said, if you can find him in that 4th or 5th round, I think he's a definite body that you bring into camp and maybe even potentially compete for that right guard spot, because I think he's got a future in this league as a spot starter, just as a rotational backup that gives you a lot of scheme versatility, but has those qualities that you just simply cannot develop in a guy who has all the measurables and the talent. But if you don't have that core strength, that torque to be able to drive off blocks, you're just not going to be successful in the long term. And I think he has that right now at 22, 23 years old, playing against SEC guys. And, maybe Bengals fans are too scarred from drafting Marcus Hunt to draft Eastern European guys or Scandinavian guys, but he's a player, and I think they should definitely take a look at him.
Yeah, and he's got more experience than Marcus Hunt does.
He's also not 27. So.
Yeah. Marcus Hunt had the 1 year, and great production, but the 1 year wonder type. And ironically, Marcus Hunt has gone on to have a couple of nice years with the Colts since moving on from the Bengals. Go figure that one out. But I like what you said, and one of the things, now granted, this was during the Paul Alexander, Marvin Lewis era, but one of the things the Bengals have coveted out of their offensive linemen is versatility, and the ability of guys to be able to play, especially the interior guys, to be able to play guard, to be able to play center, especially those backup guys. You look at TJ Johnson, you look at Trey Hopkins, you look at, the list goes on and on and on. They even tried to experiment Andre Smith at guard and tackle. There's a lot of guys that they like to have positional flexibility, therefore, to potentially save roster spots and like you said, kind of be able to have a spot starter if you're in a pinch to be able to come in and play well. I getting this question, I've kind of wanted to now research this guy a little bit more. I looked up some reports on him and saw a little bit about him, but I think he's a guy, like you said, could immediately be a guy who's a backup guy for a team, make the team, be a backup guy, probably a day 3 pick, and can help out a team in that capacity early, and then maybe push for a starting job as he gets more time under his belt. Now, in terms of Glenn's question for him going to the Bengals, obviously there's 32 teams. He can go 32 places. It just depends. But the fact that the Bengals seemingly have an open right guard position right now, also, right tackle, even though this kid doesn't play tackle, but that should be open as well. Clint Bowling is now entering his 9th year, I believe. So, that's something to think about as well. There's a lot of issues still to be resolved on this offensive line. So if there is a spot and a team that needs able offensive linemen, interior offensive linemen, the Bengals are one. So that, that could be a possibility for him. But good question. And we're worldwide, John. Guys are emailing us from Germany and Denmark. It's pretty cool. We'll get out of here with this last one, and this was through text. And now we're staying in the States for this one, and it's from good friend Frank from Virginia, and he jokes, 3 weeks in a row, does that count me as a regular? We usually have our regulars, Terrell and John from Kentucky and a few others that call in. So Frank in Virginia, I guess 3 weeks in a row, if we do answer your question, that does make you a regular. So thanks for the text in advance, Frank. We know Callahan is in, and most outlets seem to have high confidence in Del Rio. I'm assuming that means high confidence in Del Rio being the defensive coordinator. He seems to be the guy there. Who do you think are likely candidates to fill other vacant position coach openings? That's kind of a difficult question because we have to kind of look out there. I think, you mentioned the Mike Sherman connection. He's been kind of one that's floated out there. Brian Callahan's dad, Bill, there's been some rumors of that. Maybe, those two guys are linked to the offensive line group. I don't know. I think they were smart to keep Livingston as the secondary coach. I think he did a good job with the safeties there. But I think they need to be pretty careful with who they bring in at these other assistant marks, because now you have an unproven head coach, basically an unproven offensive coordinator. Del Rio is, I think, a good hire in the fact that he's got a lot of experience in the NFL. So that's a good guy to lean on. But any other ideas or names out there you want to toss around that you think could be good fits for the Bengals in some of their position coach capacities? You've got tight ends, you've got offensive line, you've got quarterbacks. What am I missing here? Linebackers. Things like that.
Yeah, I'm not tremendously prepared for this question, I guess, because it's like you don't hear about these guys until they get hired, right? Like unless they're like former, coordinators that got fired that are just looking to get a job, I guess. I know some people have doubts about Bill Callahan coming, but I think from how early that was like being reported or whatever, I think the Bengals do have plans to either swindle him away from the Redskins, or because when the Buccaneers hired Bruce Arians, the Tampa Bay ended up sending a 6th-round pick to Arizona because they thought that Arians was still under contract with Arizona and they didn't even have to do it. I think that's a possibility that the Bengals could do with Washington, either to establish good faith and potentially a future Andy Dalton trade, or just to get Zach Taylor's former college coach into the staff and replace Frank Pollock, obviously, because we don't know if Pollock either left on his own accord because he didn't like the direction that they were going, or they just had future ambitions for a guy who's even better than Pollock, and that definitely fits the bill for Callahan. But I'm definitely interested in seeing who the linebackers coach is going to be, because you're looking at not only just a new defensive coordinator, but under a new head coach who was obviously defensive oriented and was a former linebacker coach of his own. It could be a guy who worked under a Del Rio, or just, a guy, another assistant from another team who's just looking for a fresh start. But whoever that linebackers coach is, I think that's the position in general that we will probably see the most vast difference, because of how low the quality has been at that position group for so long, and just the same kind of coaching philosophies under Lewis. So to have a fresh face there, and I know I'm kind of dodging the question because I don't have a name for it, because honestly I just don't, but I just think that's really just it'll just be probably the most interesting one to watch, because we should probably expect some fresh, brand new philosophies and brand new preferences of players at that position.
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting names still out there. One that kind of, and this would be something maybe for the quarterback's coach thing, and it might elicit some eye rolls. I'm not a big fan of the guy myself, based on kind of some of the things that he's done, but to my knowledge, he is available. And that's Joe Philbin. And he's kind of an offensive mind, a guy that I don't know. Again, you look at some of these position coaches. He's been a head coach, was fired as a head coach. He was an interim coach this year. So he could be a guy that, if you're looking for bigger names that could be floating out there, there are other assistants kind of working their way up as well. But do not be surprised if it's a bigger name, quote unquote, that end up filling some of these position coach things. I mean, we saw the Bengals linebacker coach. His name is escaping me at the moment. He was the head coach of the Saints. They just got rid of him, but he had head coaching experience. And
yeah, what the hell?
I'm trying to get now too. Hazlitt. Gosh, it's been a long Jim Hazlitt. It's been a long week already. But
wait, he was our former linebacker coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim Hazlitt. He was a guy that was a head coach for a long time, a defensive coordinator, and kind of took the perceived step back, if you will, in terms of going from NFL head coach to a position coach. So that's why, if you're looking for bigger names like a Philbin to be he's a guy, an offensive coordinator type of guy, head coach, interim head coach, and then he could potentially do a quarterback coach type of thing. But they already have Alex Van Pelt as a quarterback's coach, so maybe he comes in as like an offensive assistant. I don't know. It just depends, but there are big names out there that are still looking for jobs. Guys there are guys that make lateral moves because they feel they've been passed over in a specific team within a specific team. So we'll see. It's hard to really kind of pull up a name and say, this guy could be the assistant coach, aside from some of the names we've already heard kicked around. But I would say do not be surprised if there are some big names that potentially get linked to a position coach position, staff position, as well as do not be surprised if there's kind of some guys where you go, who? Some guys that are a little unproven. We'll see. Thanks for all the questions tonight, guys. We appreciate it. Sorry we didn't take calls and stuff. We already had a few queued up, but we're running a little long on time. But we wanted to get to those. You can get this show on iTunes. You can get it on Stitcher, on Google Play, on Megaphone. You can get it on YouTube and on cincyjungle.com. And as always, we appreciate the support. We appreciate all the questions and for everybody tuning in live. But enjoy the Super Bowl this weekend, however you may be watching it. Enjoy yourself, and let's hope that Zach, my wish comes true and Zach Taylor brings
Let's get that ring, Whit. Let's get that ring.
That's right. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. We'll see you next week, and hopefully we'll be talking about the Zach Taylor hire being official. So check that out, and also check out our upcoming interview once again with Tyler Boyd. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.